There you go.
That's right. One thing I just wanted to let you know is that the meeting is being live streamed, just so you're aware. I think we shared that with the CPC members. And I think, are we live? Okay, we are live. So yeah, I just wanted to kick this off. Some of you may have been at the town hall that just wrapped up. Really robust discussion, and I think a lot of the topics overlap with what we discuss at this level, at the committee level. Again, my name is Steve Efros. I'm one of the project managers, and today we're going to kick off what's called site planning scenarios, kind of a larger discussion about how that will kind of roll into the next phase of the project. So I think that's probably. So this is Becca Cabell from Fora.
Thanks, Steve. Becca Cabell with Fora Architecture and Interiors. I'm project manager for the team. We are teamed with Lever and with co-locate for co-design and for community engagement. We have people from those firms here, and you'll be seeing them later on. I'm just going to do a super quick overview of what we're going to do. This is the schedule. It's too small, you can't see it, but I think you have it in prior presentations. And what's important to know is that this is the first of two duplicate meetings that are happening. This is the Comprehensive Planning Committee meeting number 3.1, and we're repeating it in a couple of weeks for folks who aren't quite back yet, recognizing that we've been on hiatus over the summer, and we need to make sure that everybody's up to speed and engaged in the conversation. You are welcome to come back a second time if you want, if it's that fun. So we are here halfway through our comprehensive planning effort. That's going to take us through the end of the year, and it's going to establish the scope of work for this project, including where we're going to put the building, what's in it, how much it's going to cost, when it's going to be open, and we'll start actually designing it next year. So big work this year that you're all super engaged in. The big important thing on this page is this: hold the date, community design workshop on October 15th. That's a Saturday. It's not compulsory, but please tell your friends, please join us if you can, have kids come. It's going to be a hands-on, very engaging, activity-based day that we're still planning, so we can't tell you exactly what's going to happen, but it will be awesome. And this is the agenda for today. We hope that you all know that we're so packed and short of time that we're asking people to stay beyond the 2-hour point to 2.5, or even a little bit more than that, 2 3/4 hours. We'll try and pack it in. But we're going to look at a land acknowledgement. Keisha's going to read that out for us. There's going to be a quick conversation, I believe, around the renaming process that Danny's going to lead. We previewed that in the town hall meeting as well. And then a quick conversation around the chair role for this committee. We talked about that briefly and maybe too hurriedly before, so we're going to revisit that. And then we'll move into the sort of meat of the conversation as far as your design team is concerned. Corey Squire is going to talk about sustainability and introduce carbon as a topic. You'll be seeing Corey at each of these meetings as we move forward. We're going to talk about community engagement with co-locate, giving some feedback about what they've been doing. If any of the members of the CPC have feedback from your communities and your stakeholder groups, that would be the moment to hear from you too. You can always send us information ahead of time or after, and we can report it. And then we've got 2 interactive exercises that we're going to do with you, each of them around 45 minutes long. It'll be breakout group work around prioritizing the design drivers, or the sort of the criteria that will really guide decision making. That's a sort of somewhat abstract conversation we'll be asking you to lean into. We'll take a quick break if we have time, and then we will do a second group work around evaluating 3 site design options. Just the beginning of our work about, okay, where are we going to put the school? We need to start thinking about design at this point. And then finally, we'll do some homework assignments, which brings me back to the beginning, just recognizing that we have asked all of you to do some homework. We sent out some guiding principles a couple of weeks ago, and a Google sheet that we would like you to give us some feedback in. And we don't want to keep on asking you to do it, but this is my first request to please do that work, go out into your community, share your feedback on those guiding principles. It's a living document. We want it to truly reflect the values of the broad community. So we're going to change it as we get feedback on it. It's an important part of what we're asking. With that, I think we're going to go into our land acknowledgement. I guess this is our homework slide from last time. There was some summer reading as well, around the various policies that PPS has in place that will guide our work. So we have links to all of those and so on. So yeah, please go to the Google form. And Keisha, over to you.
Yes.
And I do have the clicker if you want, or I can do it for you.
Yes, click from me.
Oh.
I'm going to read from
Okay.
here. Land Acknowledgement Anti-Oppression Statement. At PPS, we strive to strengthen our relationships with the Native community and Native nations. A symbol of this commitment is a land acknowledgement. These statements bring visibility to the First Peoples of our collective home. This statement is meant to provide information and context while also encouraging all of us to reflect on our current day relationship with Native people and Native experiences. We acknowledge that we live, work, and play in the traditional land of the Chinook, Clackamas, Calabria, Multnomah, Glasgow, Cathlamet, Tualatin, Malala. We also know that many other tribes made their homes along the Columbia and Willamette rivers. We honor their history and acknowledge the sacrifices that they made. Let us also acknowledge the robust present-day federally recognized tribes of this area, the Grand Ronde, Siletz, and Cowlitz. In addition, I would like to acknowledge the Chinook Nation, who has been seeking federal recognition for many years. The urban Indian community is made up of tribal diversity that originates from around the country, representing 400 tribes. The urban Indian community has a vivid history made up of people whose journeys have brought them to Portland by ways of forced displacement or seeking more opportunities. Today, these tribes and communities celebrate their heritage, showing resilience and tenacity that will be greatly admired by their ancestors. Within Portland Public Schools today, we serve students and families representing more than 150 different tribal nations within our education system. It is our obligation to teach accurate information, past and present, about the impact of colonization on our students, all students today, and make visible the multitude of Native families and many diverse ways Native communities and families are living in the present. We encourage every person to reflect on their own history, understand the history of colonization and genocide, and support Indigenous sovereignty, priorities, and actions. This acknowledgement is one step that we can take to improve our support of Indigenous communities in the area. In addition to acknowledging the land, those that have been here since time began, we must also remember our stolen siblings from Africa, whose labor built the vast wealth of this country. These two communities and the atrocities committed against them are intrinsically intertwined due to our existence within a white supremacist world. Everything we have is due to stolen land and stolen labor, and every system and institution that impacts our lives is built upon this legacy. It is our job to speak that truth into spaces so that we can begin to heal. Thank you.
Okay. Annie, you're up.
I also just want to thank you for going through the land development and anti-oppression statement. As a Native woman, that is something that I think when we talk about the work of racial justice, like just the way that opens up the space and sort of like allows folks to see folks and to see each other. So thank you for doing that. And thank you to our board members, many of them who are here who voted on sort of like formalizing having a land acknowledgement as part of meetings where board members are present or our community is present. And I'm really proud that our land acknowledgement was written by one of our community partners who collaborated with the tribal chairs of the Cowlitz and Siletz nations to help us. They're not perfect and they're different and they're not everything, but the willingness to be able to open up a meeting with that is something that really speaks to the community here at Jefferson and our aspirations to be as inclusive as possible. So thank you for that. So I wanted to give a quick renaming update. I know that half of you have already just heard me talk about it, so I will just try to give a quick overview about where we are in the process. As part of wanting to really have work in racial equity and social justice that is not performative, but rather linked to improving student experience. something that wasn't just a process in name only, but something that could be linked to making sure that students, as they walk through the halls, as they have, as they are learning, that we weren't just renaming schools to rename schools, but we really wanted to make sure that it was an inclusive process. We asked the board to go ahead and improve a process to update the administrative directives. So there's board policies that help us reach big goals, and then there's an administrative directive that the superintendent and staff work on, which is sort of how we get to reaching those goals. So over the past 2 years, Shanice Clark, who is our Director of Community Engagement, worked with a set of student leaders, community partners to really try to develop a process for renaming that would sustain the reasons why we want to rename. So what they did is that they listened to students and did some empathy interviews, asked students about their experience, what they would like to change about their experience, as well as we had 2 sort of case studies, the name changes at formerly Wilson, now Ida B. Wells, and formerly Madison, now McDaniel. Using that information, we've proposed a set of recommendations to change the process for renaming. And what that process looks like is that we want to make sure that people don't just jump to, here's the name. That in fact, that students are really engaged and helping to drive that conversation, that the processes, we used to say have a committee. Now the recommendations are much more robust and making sure that there are not just students, staff, parents, but community members, community organizations, the whole range of stakeholders that make up our school communities to take part in the renaming process. And to part of the work and the suggestions are a toolkit that sort of allows people to learn facilitation through difference. How do you get through, opposing opinions to some consensus? And so we have this process that's laid out. We also have a sort of like an assessment around readiness. Our school communities not only renaming, but are they also, do they have the capacity to do a large engagement process? Do they have the know-how? Do they have other plans besides just renaming that look at changing the experience of students of color? So it's not just changing the name, but not necessarily changing the student experience. So those sets of recommendations and changes are now in front of the superintendent. He is reviewing those. Once the superintendent approves those, we will talk to the board, let them know that. I want to be really clear, the board still approves the final name as per the board policy. What we're trying to change is the process to make it more inclusive, more robust, and more at changing student experience. We also know that because we want a process that's more effective at getting that student experience, that we are not anticipating, and because there also is a fiscal impact, we're not anticipating doing more than 2 to 3 changes per year, because we want to make sure that we're really putting the right amount of effort and capacity to support those name changes. So there's a website that is very updated, and we'll make sure that you all have the links to that website. You can see videos of meetings that we had that got us to these recommendations, this toolkit, and then once the final administrative directive with changes has been approved, we'll post that hopefully within the next few weeks, and then we'll start. We'll talk with board, and then we'll start reaching out to different school communities to make sure that they understand the process and how to sort of start moving into that. So coming very soon. This happens in the middle of COVID, and so we anticipate that we're kind of ready to go now. Like schools, communities have done the transition, and so we want to be ready to support them. And we also don't just want to change school names to change school names. things, because that's the woke thing to do. We actually want to make sure that there's a different experience for our students, and we don't want this to be something that's just a performance. So, so we have taken our time, and we have talked to students, and we have wanted to be as inclusive as possible in getting to these recommendations. And we also want to raise the expectation around that process of engagement, so that we know that this is something that if we change the name in 2022, that in 2042, we know why we changed the name even then, and we can see that those values and those student experiences changed along with that. So if there's any questions, I don't want to be between you and interactive materials. So you'll have a contribution.
To ensure that, that means you're going to have something that
Absolutely.
as an orientation to freshmen.
Absolutely. So PBS is very engaged in getting back to making sure that what is academic excellence is synonymous with culturally responsive. Our superintendent, our deputy superintendent of instruction has led a huge push over the last 6 months, making sure that we are, all of our work around racial justice and all of our work throughout the district is connected to standards-driven, high-quality instruction. And that if you are doing excellent instruction, then you are doing instruction that is culturally responsive. We are not where we need to be just yet, but we are, everyone is pushing and in alignment about making sure that that happens, so that when you think about that 9th grader, you have full confidence that in history that student is not only going to be able to have the opportunity to succeed, but it's going to be in a way that is culturally affirming and culturally sustainable. Absolutely. Exactly. They'll probably have some suggestions for more.
So I'm gonna keep us on track. Thank you, Danny, so much. So Keisha, I think you're gonna, yeah.
Yeah, so Steve's not gonna go over the co-chair.
So we're handing out a little kind of informational sheet, but I'll just kind of give you a highlight of what we've been thinking about with the chair and their co-chair role. We definitely understand that, based on one of the early CPC meetings where we, I think, as Becca said, we had kind of an accelerated compressed process where I think people were not really satisfied with the outcome. So we went back, we actually talked with I would say the selected co-chairs just to kind of get their insights and input into kind of where we could strengthen this effort. So we really went back to kind of first sort of foundational ideas, and that actually goes to the charter for the CPC, which includes a statement about the MPC, or now the CPC, will nominate a chairperson or co-chairperson to assist in MPC or CPC meeting agenda and presentation review, steering planning meetings, and meeting protocol. So what we did is we kind of broke down each of those categories so that everyone has a better understanding of what this role really entails. So this, I won't kind of read through it completely, because part of what we're going to do is reinitiate kind of an online kind of nomination and selection process. And so you'll have time, it will happen actually after CPC 3.2, so the second version of this meeting, those attendees can kind of hear about it. But really talking about, just setting the expectations, because we understand it can feel, I think, intimidating. Like, is this, what am I getting into in this role? So really a lot of it is pretty basic and kind of down to earth in terms of kind of discussing with the project team about meeting agenda, presentation review, kind of getting a sense of what future CPC meeting will present, and maybe offering some advice, you might want to tweak this or that. Steering planning meetings, which is really just about understanding what future meetings topics will be, and so that you have kind of the bigger picture in that role. But in terms of meeting protocol, which I think kind of comes to the meat of people's interest, but also concern, one thing we want to emphasize is that the project team, the OSM team, and the design and engagement team are really the ones that will be facilitating the meeting. So you don't have to be concerned that you're kind of playing that traditional kind of chair role. But also talking about meeting protocols in terms of, how would we consider different options going forward, different planning scenarios, different ultimately kind of preferred option for to recommend to the board. And so obviously, typically, as you can imagine, it's often been kind of majority rule. That's kind of maybe the conventional way of looking at it. But I think both our team and I think probably by extension, the design engagement team are really looking to make sort of a more collaborative model. So a consensus-based process. So this sheet kind of just talks about that. And that's kind of why we've highlighted that approach. It's a big picture approach. There's lots of ways to achieve it. But I think the idea is that basically having the aim of acceptance by all kind of different scenario options. But also I think you'll hear from co-locate that we want to hear for people that don't necessarily completely agree, we want to understand why. So at the very bottom, you'll just see kind of some of the benefits of a consensus-based process, collaboration, cooperation, egalitarianism, inclusion, and participation. So I will share this as a separate communication to the entire CPC after the second version of this on September 7th. And then we'll have an online survey way that you can kind of put yourself out there as to be one of the potential co-chairs, and then we'll have a selection process. So just wanted to kind of very briefly kind of touch base with that because we know that was kind of concern.
Can you explain area?
Well, I guess it's something to do, I think, with kind of equity and kind of giving everyone sort of the same voice, I would say.
All voices are equal.
All voices are equal, yeah. But you'll hear more, think about it, digest it, and we'll present you more information just so you understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'm up. All right, so time for our sustainability session. So hey everyone, my name is Corey Squire. I'm with Bora Architects. I'm the sustainability director there, and I'll be heavily focused on sustainability for this project. So I wanted to start with this idea of what does sustainability mean? It's a broad term. It means different things to different people. And maybe just throw it out to the group briefly if anyone has a thought. What does sustainability mean to you? I'm sure there's a thought. I'm sure that somebody has a thought. Renewable, maybe renewable energy, maybe renewable resources, maybe renewing things in general. Keep things going. Yeah, no, that's a big piece of this. So I wanted to kind of jump on a subset of sustainability, which is sustainable design. So sustainability is this broad idea, very much based on renewing things, perpetual use, function, not degrading over time. Sustainable design is how we apply these practices to the built environment, to the design process. So very much some ideas around what we'll be focusing on for this project. It really touches on this idea of better design and broader design. Sustainable design kind of reimagines the traditional design process where you are proposed with a problem, design a school, a building this big on this site, and the criteria might be its function, it might be its appearance, it might be how well it photographs, and there are a lot of kind of traditional values or outcomes for design, but sustainable design kind of broadens those, focuses on how can we make this process better to a broader group of people and beyond people, just to natural systems as well. So this is how I like to think about sustainable design. It's about zeroing in on what matters. So there are lots of potential outcomes of a design process. Some things might matter more than others, like the health of the occupants. For a school, maybe education is what matters the most, maybe community or belonging. Making informed and intentional decisions. So, and if I make a design move, if I take this chunk of the building and I put it in this location in the site, I want to know what the implications of that are from the perspective of, again, health, of thermal comfort, of resource use. We want to anticipate the unknown. This building that we create will be around for a very long time, hopefully, that's the plan. There are things that'll happen over the next, let's say, 50 to 100 years, climatically, socially. Some of them we can anticipate. We know that there's going to be droughts. We know that the climate is getting warmer. Some other things we're not going to be able to anticipate. We don't know what education will look like in 50 years. So we need to design a building both to respond to the challenges that we know are coming, but remain flexible for what we for the changes that we know are coming, but we don't know what they are quite yet. And then we need to invest in people. Sustainable design is very human-centric. Again, I make a design decision that has an implication on an individual occupant's learning, their education, their health, their long-term health, their short-term health, their ability to focus, their ability to concentrate, their test scores. There's been lots of research around design features or kind of indoor environments that either result in one outcome or another outcome. So then this idea of broader design, who are we designing for? Or what are the outcomes that we'd like to design for? So there's this is a diagram that I put together to try to get this point across graphically. There's this sphere of consideration, right? When we're making decisions, it could be design, it could be anything else. We're making decisions, there's a series of ideas or focuses or outcomes that we want to consider. So in traditional practice, the budget, the schedule, the appearance of a building have always been inside of the sphere of consideration. But not all these other important things that haven't always been there, right? The health of the planet, resilience into the future, the benefits to the community. Sustainable design broadens that sphere of consideration and it pulls in all these other ideas. So suddenly the local ecology and its health, the ability to deal with these future climatic conditions is all pulled into our sphere of considerations. These are the things that we think about when we make decisions. I'm referencing the board policy again on climate justice. What an amazing tool, right? What an amazing document that really kind of leads this process of what are we considering? We're considering justice, we're considering climate, and just I'm going to be referencing this over and over again as I come back because we can make decisions now in the design process, like broad conceptual planning, but then again when we start actually designing, that impact or kind of lead towards the goals laid out in this document. So a major goal in this document is around carbon or emissions. So Portland Public Schools will reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 50% in 2030, 8 years away, and then zero emissions in 2040. So this is an ambitious goal. There are no net zero school districts in the country right now. Reducing emissions by 50% using that 2018 pre-pandemic benchmark, that will be a challenge. And it would be easy to make the argument that this school and the design of this school will have a big impact on whether or not the district meets that goal or not. This is a large school. This is an important school. This is a school that does not perform so well from an energy standpoint, and we have an ability to change that and make this kind of the leader. This is the first major school since this policy has been passed. So I want to talk about kind of so we'll zoom back a little bit, talk about carbon, and just make sure we're all on the same page. Oh, here we go. Jefferson High School, major part of the story. So carbon, most people will already understand kind of the impact between, or the kind of the connection between building performance, energy use, carbon, climate change. But just to sum it up really quickly, to make sure we're all on the same page, carbon is everywhere, right? Carbon is the basis of oil and coal and other sorts of fossil fuels. It's also what trees are made out of. It's what we're made out of. It's what buildings are made out of. It's everywhere. But we want to keep that kind of in the ground. We want to keep that out of the atmosphere, right? Because when we generate energy using fossil fuel, or when we use fossil fuels to create building materials, we release carbon into the atmosphere. And that causes climate change, which is very, very problematic, both locally and globally, right? These kind of climatic changes that we're experiencing, the heat waves, the droughts, all these challenges are because of decisions that individuals and communities and nations are making about how they deal with carbon. So we could be leaders in how we think about it, just like Portland Public Schools is a leader in kind of prioritizing carbon in the design and operations of the building. So how do we do this? One way is wood. It's focusing on wood. when trees, obviously, they absorb CO2 out of the atmosphere. They incorporate that carbon into their structure. And if we then take that wood, sustainably harvest it and build buildings out of it, we've captured that carbon out of the atmosphere into our building, right? Alternatively, if we were to build our buildings out of concrete or steel, we'd be using a huge amount of emissions to create very heavy, dense buildings that would kind of further exacerbate the problem. So I want to talk about two different types of carbon emissions because this is what we want to think about when we're designing a building. There's operational emissions, operational carbon, and then there's embodied carbon. Operational carbon is what we often think about. This is the carbon that's released into the atmosphere when we burn fossil fuels to generate energy, right? So these lights are on right now. They're using a certain amount of energy. In the state of Oregon, that 60% of energy is renewable, but 40% of it is fossil fuel generated. So just every source of energy that we use to operate a building kind of emits carbon into the atmosphere. So every year that building is operational, there'll be some amount of carbon that's emitted. Now, most of the carbon that's emitted for a new building has to do with generating, manufacturing, harvesting, and transporting the construction material. That's called embodied carbon. So before the building even opens, a huge amount of carbon has already been emitted into the atmosphere. So our opportunity when we're designing a new building or renovating an existing building or whatever we decide to do is how do we create this building using as little carbon as possible, as little embodied carbon as possible to generate it. And then we'll work on the operational side as well. So what are the major strategies for both of these? Operational carbon, we reduce that through energy efficiency. And we'll talk a lot about energy efficiency measures in kind of subsequent meetings and presentations, and then offsetting as much as possible with solar PV. Embodied carbon, two major strategies. One of them is used in an existing building. Obviously, we have an existing building here, and part of the discussion today is whether or not we want to reuse it, and carbon is one of those lenses that we want to look through. And building with wood, because again, wood, trees sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, and then we can store it in the building for the next 100 years or whatever. And this is what we're focusing on. So this is a challenge, and there's a lot of criteria that we're going to look at when we decide kind of how we're going to site plan this project. Do we preserve part of this building for a lot of different reasons, or do we start fresh and build a new building? So we ran a little bit of analysis, and there's still a lot of unknowns. So it's not a clear-cut answer about which is a better approach from a carbon standpoint. But what we do know is that if we build the new building out of wood, it's probably comparable to preserving an existing building, probably a wash. We could probably go in either direction. If we build a new building of concrete or steel, then it's not a wash anymore. Then we should preserve the existing building. So these things to think about. When we discuss kind of our site planning and what we want to do with the site plan, with the existing building, with this new strategy, something to keep in mind. If we do decide that we want to move the building to a different part of the site and fully demolish the existing one, we really need to be building with wood. And that's something we want to be doing anyway. So that's what I had for you. Any questions broadly on carbon, on embodied carbon, on any of these initial strategies you want to be thinking about? Yes.
So I don't want to derail this, but as I'm looking at all of this wood and thinking less concrete and steel, I'm also thinking of the really horrific earthquakes that it was intended for our area and wondering how well wood stands up to that.
The answer is excellent.
Okay.
The building will be seismically safe regardless of what decision we make. But that's a really important point, because if we were, super safe. Let's just say that we weren't in Portland. Let's just say that we were in, I don't know, Central Texas, where I used to live. It is not a seismic zone. And if that was the case, it would be 100% a better answer to preserve the existing building and not demolish it and build a new one. The reason it's a wash here is because if we preserve the existing building, we need to pump a lot of steel and concrete into it to do the seismic. And that steel and concrete, the quantity of that is not that different than building a new existing. And it's obviously less. It's obviously less, and that's why it's a wash. But it's not that different. But if we build a wood building, it'll be very safe.
So there were a couple more questions out
Yes.
there. I do want to keep it short though, because we're hang on.
If you're building a building they're so close to the target of 2040 to be net zero, that mean by the time this is all done, essentially, you'll probably already be achieving that, and then the rest of it will full students, or are you building it with the station changing it in the future?
Well, no, it's a really interesting question. So there's a few different ways we can think about that. Number one is currently this building has two energy sources, gas and electricity. About 20% of the operational energy for the current Jefferson High School is electricity, and 80% of it is gas. Gas is for heating water. We want to build an all-electric building for the new building. We want to eliminate gas use. And if we eliminate gas use and we put solar panels on the roof, we're going to be able to offset some of that electricity, but not all of it. But over the next 40 years, in fact, by law in the state of Oregon, the grid will become cleaner. So the grid is supposed to be 100% renewable by 2040. So if we don't use any gas and we have an energy efficient building and we offset some of that with solar panels and we still use a little bit of energy, that's fine as long as the grid catches up. That means that embodied energy is all the more important because that increasingly becomes a larger piece of the pie. Yes.
What's on the changes of this now?
So in terms of wood, in terms of carbon in general,
Whichever way you go, what is going to be the changes that's going to be in them?
no, it's an important question. So there's a lot of experiential benefits of a wood building, for instance. First of all, it's beautiful. There's these biophilic tendencies. People tend to feel calmer, more relaxed in wood environments. It's just closer to nature. There's great acoustical properties of wood. Besides that, there's also kind of educational pieces. And one major of the three kind of high level priorities of the Portland Public School climate justice policy is sustainable education, right? So we have climate, we have health, and then we have education. And if we have a building that expresses the strategy that we're using for carbon reduction, which is something that a wood building would do, or preserving the existing building would also do that, we can incorporate the building into the curriculum so that the students kind of better understand how the building is performing, how it's benefiting them, what the strategies are for this kind of carbon-free future. Yes.
And I think last time you mentioned that the new school would be like leading other schools or something like that with how it's built. So is that gonna work both ways? If it's decided to build it this way or if it's built that way?
Yes. Well, yes. So, and what I mentioned was that this is the first school that we're applying this new policy. And preserving the existing structure or building a wood building are two strategies for kind of achieving these carbon outcomes, right? But again, if we were to build a mass concrete building, we would not be leading. Yes, and then depending on the strategy we end up taking, that will lead to other decisions and other strategies to further enforce those ideas.
I wanted to, Director always talk about like the use of natural light in buildings, which is kind of reduces your electric use, is also supposed to be very beneficial for learning environments.
Yes, that is a huge important point.
Piece and the built environment piece together that can create spaces that are ideal for learning. And conversely, buildings that are, central office building, for instance, that's it's dark and it's not healthy air quality.
Right, and we're going to get into strategies of indoor air quality. We're going to get strategies of daylighting. We're going to want operable windows. We're going to want high windows to let light in. We're going to want narrow corridors. That's actually a huge point of the existing building. It's narrow, and the reason it's narrow and has tall ceilings is because it was lit by daylight. Right? It wasn't in the basement. They didn't have the electric lighting back in the day for that. But it also obviously makes it a challenge because classrooms are bigger and it's harder to fit things in. But yes, we will be talking about all of these interior environmental qualities. Yes.
I just want to respond to your point because it's feeling very profound to me right now because with all of the modernizations, up to this point in PPS, sustainability has been a big focus and priority. But in order to meet the dramatic goals that we now have as part of our climate response policy, a lot of conventional options are off the table. Which is really kind of profound.
Yes.
As far as how this process goes and, how wide our realm of considerations are. Really not that wide.
which is pretty cool.
It's pretty cool, right? Yes, you can. There was a time back in the day when a quote unquote green building was basically a regular building. They put solar panels on the roof. But we are beyond that. A sustainable building today, a carbon justice building, like it is a fundamentally different building. We are using different technologies. We're thinking about these things differently. I'm running out of time. Which is
Well, I think we
Let's
should just,
take this
I want to just take a moment. I mean, there are hands up. I
Yeah.
want to reflect their hands up, and we could probably spend our entire remaining 2 hours talking about this. We could pivot and do that, but that's going to kind of require that we regroup again and do the work that we were planning to do today. We are planning to have a sustainability workshop that would be a public workshop. All of you would be invited, and it would be a public invitation also. And I believe that we're trying to do that in October too.
Yeah, late
Yeah,
October.
Late 29th, maybe. Yeah, right at the end of October into November.
It's gonna be Halloween themed.
Yeah, we'll come in costumes.
Candy.
Does anybody have a super urgent question that they need addressed now?
If there's demolition being done, sustainability and what's things like with all the materials that are currently here and how we're disposing of the materials and the whole thing on campus when that's being done. What does that look like?
So that's a really important point. And that'll come up later in a little bit of the site planning discussion. If we obviously can't have kids in the building if we're demolishing part of the building, right? Because there is dust, there's major air quality considerations. So there will be strategies around that. And near the building as well. Yes, 100%. So yes, that'll definitely be discussed. And then in terms of where the building materials go, we will want to recycle or reuse as much as possible. So something like brick masonry, it's a great opportunity to do something like site planning or pathways, to have the actual building materials kind of contribute to the new site. So on a material by material basis, we will want to study that. But yes, excellent point around demolition and air quality. That is huge. Yes.
I have a question about the preservation versus new building. And you said this would be the first site that's been considered for like a whole new.
Oh no, I just said the first school since this board policy around carbon reductions.
The climate policy.
Says the climate. Policy.
Yeah.
So
Not the
Mountain,
same
which
goals,
is
yeah.
just recently, it was not designed under the new climate policy that.
Got it.
So this is truly the first.
We do have one net zero building in our portfolio that's brand new. So you really think people can go look at it.
That would be great.
Like, that would be adaptive reuse, what they did with some of the materials on site.
Yeah. Which building is that?
That would be Kellogg Middle School.
I also want to say that
Yeah.
this is not the last time we're talking about sustainability. Corey comes back to each section, brings a new topic. So next topic, I think, is
Indoor air quality. Indoor air quality is the topic. So we'll talk about demolition. We'll talk about all these important things. But you had your hand up, so let me just get your question.
Sure, yeah, I'm aware, like, just in East area to this, so this is my question. In sustainability, like, there's carbon sequestered in such construction as this. And so it seems as if making it seismic, we could lose out on that.
Right.
So maybe that's the answer. And then the other curiosity is, like, in this new techniques, I don't know if you were here for the earlier meeting, but there was a lot of talk around like businesses, like being the contractors. Like, what does that pivot mean for businesses that are not working that way?
Yeah, I mean, we'll obviously we have goals around minority businesses, minority contractors, as part of the design team and the rest of the team. And I don't think that there's going to be a kind of a misalignment there between kind of construction methodologies and minority-owned businesses or small businesses. I haven't seen anything like that. So I mean, to your point, all these goals still stand, and the hope is that we can accomplish everything we set out to.
I think we truly do need.
Yes, we will move on.
Okay.
But we have two.
Well, you know this, but we please take this flyer if you have a question that we didn't answer. And we're very excited that you are so excited about this topic. So, we're thrilled.
but we do want to make sure we get through the
And-
other things that we've planned for you. So there is an email that you can send your questions to. We will answer them. Corey is going to be back to answer.
And this is a good
around
pitch for
you.
2 hour sustainability workshop
Yeah,
around
and
Halloween.
sustainability workshop. So,
If you send us your questions, anything you think of even after this, maybe we can incorporate it into these longer sessions.
For sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So, thanks, Corey. So, yeah, this is community engagement. Yeah, we're trying. We're not quite there yet. So Kareem, can we compress and do it? And actually, as Kareem joins us to talk about community engagement, do any members of the CPC have reports that they would like to share from work that you've been doing with community? Maybe we'll just, we'll ask this again next time and make sure we have time allocated for it. Thanks, Kareem.
Speaking of community engagement, I'm here with my colleague Brian, who is actually having a chat with some elders from the community right now in another room. So it's actively happening even here right now. But yeah, I think I've met a number of y'all in these past meetings, and we had a design justice training last week. For those of you who were able to make it, where we talked a lot about the design justice approach and sort of the reasons why we take the approaches that we do. So fancy quick here. I'm going to give a quick recap of some of the work that's been done. Also joined in this room tonight with a number of community design organizers, folks that Locate has hired on from the community impacted by these projects, by this project, who are also having conversations with folks in their networks, relationships, trying to understand what the issues are that are impacting folks and the ways that this modernization effort can address those issues, not only from the spatial kind of side of things, but also understanding how policies and programs affect people and the ways that those contribute to a lack of equitable access to resources that are embedded within a building. And obviously hearing what folks' dreams and visions are for what the space can be and can do. This is impossible to read. The point being, we've been present at a couple of different public events, and we've also had a couple of engagement sessions or events with youth. I'll just click through those, but engagement continues through, or at least our scope will continue through November, and we'll be working together to figure out how that momentum continues on to the design phase of the project. But as we learn about events that are going on in the community, we try to show up there. We're asking folks what their experiences are with Jeff, with accessing programs and resources. We're also asking folks what opportunities they see for the spaces that get created, for the ways to continue to ensure that history and cultural connection to this space are not fractured or fragmented in the ways that they have been due to processes of gentrification and displacement. And we're also asking folks what concerns or questions they have about this whole process. What are the things that they're wondering about? And hopefully the more that we hear from those things, the more we're able to respond to them, both as we're out and about, but also in these sessions. So this is just a timeline that will continue to be populated with events where we show up. And if you know of spaces where you think we should be, places where we should be going in order to connect with folks who are going to have experiences and opinions about this project that will make it a more just space, please let us know. So a couple of pictures, but we went out to Fabian and spent a few hours out there with 6th through 8th graders, asking them some of those similar questions. What are their experiences of school right now? What are the things that they're worried about? What are the things that they would dream of for the high school that they're going to go to in the not too distant future? And many of these students will end up at Jeff. And the activity that we do with them is a really hands-on sort of thing where you're actually building a vision together. So writing kind of responses to prompts, but then constructing that as a sort of monument to those experiences, those questions, those opportunities. And it's a really great way for those kids who like to write things down or draw pictures to be able to engage in that method, but also for those for whom building something or doing something a little more tactile is what gets them energized and engaged to have them be able to participate in a way. So it's not all just talking at people. But this technique also works pretty well with grown-ups. And so we were at the SEI Homecoming Festival a couple weekends back, had a table set up. And in addition to having these little vision building pieces, we had a couple of survey questions where we were starting to ask folks, what are the spaces within the existing Jefferson building that mean something to you? Why do they mean that to you? What are the kinds of experiences that you would want the future of Jefferson to recreate or to sustain? And what are the experiences that were harmful or negative that you don't want to see show up? We focus on experiences because most folks are not architects, and most folks aren't going to be able to tell us that you should design a building this way. They're going to be able to say, it takes forever to get around the building because it's all stairs and hallways. And I need a place where I can go and just be. We heard a lot from students as well about the lack of gathering spaces, the lack of spaces to just be without being kind of pushed along. You're not allowed to be here. You need a hall pass in order to be out here, but there's really nowhere to gather. So listening for those sort of themes and narratives, both with youth and with adults. So our community design organizers who are here in the room with us, some of whom are here in the room with us, are also planning on connecting with folks in their networks and their relationships. And again, the reason why we work in this way at Relocate is there's no way that I'm going to know what all the issues are that affect folks in these communities. There's no way that I'm going to be able to build the relationships on the incredibly rapid project timelines that all of this work needs to be done in. And it would be presumptive of me to assume that I'm going to be able to talk to people, get all that information, somehow turn it around into a design. But folks who are already part of the community have relationships. They have an understanding of the histories that impact this place. They have different methods, different experiences, different strategies, and our role is to provide tools, resources, and information, and as much access to this process as possible, so that the organizers who are working with us are able to go out and make sure that that information gets out, and also help shape this process beyond the planning phase, but to build momentum that will carry through design. And what that ends up looking like, among other things, is starting to see narratives and themes emerge, the things that are consistently coming up. There will be nuance and details, there will be contradiction, there will be conflict, but we want to hear all of that, but we want to understand what the narratives are that build up over time so that we can design towards those narratives. So these are just some of the things that started to hear. And each one of these contains a bunch of details, but I'm going to read it at a high level for right now. And if you want to chat about any of it, you can just come find me at a breaker. I'll make my contact information available. Things we've been hearing, creating welcoming and accessible spaces for students and their communities, whether they are parents or siblings or family members, or just broader parts of the social structure that supports students' lives. Honoring cultural histories and acknowledging injustices, not only in the building, not only by kind of having tangible physical representation of those histories, but also in the curriculum. Investing in CTE and STEM learning environments and life skills applications has come up a lot as a question. How is Jeff going to get the same type of investment as other schools in the district around these different ways of learning and practicing? Investing in arts education beyond the dance program, recognizing that dance is a central component of Jeff's culture, but band, theater, ceramics, visual arts, podcasting, different forms of media, student organizing and activism has helped to create a lot of these different programs, and there's a strong desire to see that continue to be invested in. And I understand that the program as it's shaping up now reflects that, but we want to hear more about specifics of what folks are advocating for. There's also creating a range of types of gathering spaces for students, families, staff, and community members, recognizing that as a cultural hub, it's also a community hub. And there's tensions in that, creating a space for students that's safe while also making sure that it's accessible to community members. but it does represent a tremendous embodiment of resources. So what are the different types of spaces that support community life and health and well-being? In addition, developing academic programs with culturally relevant pedagogy, which came up a little bit earlier, but that's been a consistent theme. Hiring more BIPOC teachers to reflect the experiences and cultures of the communities at Jeff. That has come up a lot and directly ties to culturally relevant program pedagogy. It's hard to have one without the other. Investing in health, safety, and quality of experience for the occupants of this building during the design process. Heard a lot, both in this space and outside of this space, of, well, the building has unhealthy aspects to it now, and if students are going to continue to be here over the next few years while a new building is built, how are those being addressed? And then a few things that have come up that are maybe more concerns. Obviously, there's concerns embedded in these, but areas for us to continue to improve on. There's just a lack of general awareness about this project timeline and the goals. When we say, what does modernization, we're doing this Jefferson modernization project. The first question that most people have asked me is, what does modernization even mean? And I know there's a little bit of intentional ambiguity because we don't know if we're doing a new building or a renovation, but it doesn't give folks much to hold on to. So continuing to try to get information out that actually there's a decision to be made around that very topic. We don't have an answer to that yet. We're working on that. There's not enough information about possible outcomes for people to be able to give informed opinions. So tonight, the scenarios that we'll be talking through, that Laura's going to be sharing, that's the kind of information that people need in order to be able to respond to, but we haven't had that out yet. Then there's fears around losing access to this cultural hub with the ongoing displacement and gentrification happening in this neighborhood. And those fears are going to continue because Jefferson, this school is not going to, it's not going to interrupt those broader systems. So how is it going to directly address those systems in the ways that it can? And lastly, questions around the impacts of the project on current and future student enrollment have come up a lot. What are kids going to do? Are families going to want to send their kids to Jeff as it is right now while it's under construction, knowing that there's something coming down the line that's going to be a big, beautiful building, but what do I do with my high schooler today? Not all of these are easy questions to answer, or questions that I have answers to, but my role is to make sure they're amplified as much as I can. So that's my quick summary. I am curious if we have like 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Any of the folks who were at the design justice training, or any folks who've been having conversations about this project with people in your lives already, I'd love to hear a couple of folks if you have anything that you want to share. Becca alluded to that. Reflections, questions, concerns, things that have been coming up consistently in your conversations.
I guess the last thing you said there on the question about impacts for future student enrollment. I've just, some of my friends I've talked to just in my kind of age group that grew up, around Jeff is like, yeah, how many kids are going to start going to Jeff at the beginning? So it's just interesting because I worked at, family medicine, like enrollment, Jeff, they got a new building. So yeah, it'll just be interesting to see that, I guess. I'm kind of curious to see who's gonna end up in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Well, and also where are they gonna come from?
Right.
Overall enrollment line. Except in this district is one of the two in the city that we got to report on where the enrollment is not. But the trend has been whenever there's a high school modernized, the enrollment is actually gone beyond like the building capacity. That's been the trend. Now we'll see what happens when it comes here.
Now that we kind of have some of the board here, just another consideration, because there was a conversation that I had with someone at that meeting on Saturday that talked about Jefferson's catchment is so much different than anyone else's catchment. And that too is going to speak to how many students actually are within the catchment and should be going to the school or not. And going to other spaces, that's one thing. The other piece for me is if you're for the elder in me, the ex-student in me from this high school, the changes sound great, and I will say that, even if it's like a totally rebuild or whatever, la, 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 la. But bringing on those things so fast to a community that has been displaced so many different times over the last 50 years, if not more. I'm a little curious about what that rollout is really going to look like in terms of engagement, because we're talking to community, but we're not necessarily talking to the people at all times who have been the ones who have been displaced. So I just will throw that out.
Today was the first day back for teachers, and already I had a teacher say, please don't let them do 100% utilization.
I only laugh like that because I work for pizza. It's like, please. About that phone.
And I was at the union meeting on Monday where another teacher said she was, starting back at McDaniel after not having been there for a while, and she's like, everyone hates it. All of the staff do not like it. The fact that they do not have a place that is their own and that the students cannot always find them because they're in 4 different places in the day. So just that's what my community is telling me.
I'd like to know about that, if there's a anti-displacement lens, like the Housing Bureau has a preference policy for people that have been displaced. So if we can think ahead about what that enrollment was talking about, what that might look like.
Yeah.
To be prepared for like all scenarios.
I think that is a policy related implication, right? So the design of the building can't define that policy, but who are the decision makers who have the ability to help shape it?
I'm also a staff member here, and I think, especially once the bond passed, I think this kind of has always been like a rumor the last few years, but it has really amped up since the bond being passed. But the wonder of having justification to build this brand new big building and other schools being over enrolled, is Jefferson going to go back to a comprehensive high school and not have, we're a focus option school right now. So the wonderings about that to kind of force a jump up in enrollment, which also does trigger, because if it's boundary related, right, we all know what the folks look like that live in this boundary. So how that, changes just the, the student, everything about Jefferson, the student population. And then tying into that, a lot of, especially me as the college coordinator, a lot of the talk is like, if we go somewhere else, what happens to middle college? How do our kids access it? And then also if we go to comprehensive, will middle college be the same after? And it might be better in a good way, but it also could be non-existent or be different in a bad way. So just wonders about that.
I think we're sort of, I'm going to maybe just very do the super quick response to that specific question, but not to any others, which is the intention is that the modernized Jefferson High School is going to be a both and. It's going to be a comprehensive high school that still has its focused programs. That doesn't speak to your comment about boundary or about representation. That's a different issue. But the school itself is going to be designed to a capacity of 1,700, a comprehensive high school, and have the spaces that are necessary to serve all of the amazing programs that are here today that are exceptional, including middle college. It doesn't need a lot of space, but it needs a relationship, the performing arts and so on. So the intention is to invest in what's special and to keep that at Jefferson. I cannot answer the other question, but we can sort of push that out. I think it's going to be an ongoing question that it's going to take a long time to answer. With permission, I wanted to segue, if I may. Is that
Yeah,
okay? You sure?
Can I add one thing quick? I could just to say from the board's perspective, at least from my perspective, there is a recognition that this is an unresolved question around Jeff's geographic boundaries and Jeff's catchment area. And it's also a subset of a much bigger barrier question and problem in the district, which is that we have great imbalances in our school enrollments, and this is a policy issue that we need to deal with sooner rather than later. And Calvert's ears are perked up over there because luckily she's sort of the right person in the right place to help us work our way through this question.
The brief comment, but building on what you mentioned about prior modernization and not production. Inviting, especially reflecting in training. It's also just the historical legacy of that term is actually like violent. So it's kind of like a really bad big grade.
That's a really great comment. We'll add it to the list of words that we wish we weren't using. Which is in some cases includes the word Jefferson, and other words that I think will morph as we move through this project. Yeah. So I'm going to move us on. We are actually only 12 minutes over schedule. Not bad. Remember we had that 10-minute break? I think we still need it. So I think what we should do is try to do each of our interactive exercises in 40 minutes instead of 45 minutes. Chandra, you're up.
Okay.
So we've got a 40-minute exercise. There is food over here. You can help yourselves, but we will have a 10-minute break after this 40-minute exercise.
All right. So what we're going to talk about next is going to require everyone to get into groups. I'm going to first go over everything, and then we're going to prioritize together. So what we're talking about right now, and oh, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. If you don't remember, I'm Chandra. I'm from Lever Architecture. Our office is just down the street on that side. So key drivers of the design. There's a lot of things in the design process that are really driving things one way or the other. Sometimes it's like you're on the side of a mountain, right? And so there's a lot of things that force you into different design decisions, right? We're talking about cost and time. We're talking about culture and heritage, and we're talking about displacement and disruption of folks in the buildings, right? So we want to start with cost first. So if you think about new construction versus modernization versus seismically improving this building, new construction is going to be less expensive because there's a lot required. You kind of have to touch every surface in a building in order to make sure that it's up to code, right? So when we touch it, we have to bring it up to code. Another thing about cost is thinking about temporary facilities. If there's a swing site, we're moving students and teachers out into another place. There's the cost of preparing that site. There might be more site work that's involved in order to make room for buses, for drop off and that kind of thing. So there's an element of cost there to consider. And I guess I already said the amount of site on those swing sites potentially. And then time obviously is a big one, and that's really related to the kind of phasing that's going to happen that Jeannie's going to talk about. So you can talk about single phase versus multiple phases. If we were to move everyone offsite, do all the work at once, take down some buildings, build new ones all at once, that's obviously going to go faster. It is also potentially less expensive because you're not having sets of workers coming to do the same thing multiple times, right? So the drywall guys aren't coming in multiple times to work on different parts of the building if you're moving people in and out. So think about that. A single phase is obviously faster than multiple phases, but this is a really big site and it's very complex. So there really is, it seems unlikely that there would be one phase to get this all done. Keep that in mind. And then thinking about an offsite swing site could simplify things and make it go faster if everyone is moved out, right? But as we go on to the next page, I'll skip back to that in a second. To the next list. Okay. So what that does, though, if you have an offsite swing site, is it causes a lot of disruptions, right? Middle college now isn't next to PCC. The dance students aren't in their theater. Athletics are all displaced because the fields are being used for different things, right? So that's a big thing to consider is disruptions to the folks who are on campus. So we're going back to this idea of retention. If there's so much disruption, what does that mean for the students? Are they going to stay enrolled? Are they going to move to another school? And once they've moved, if they have a little brother or sister, is that student going to come back here once this project is done? Not. What are things that we can do help that retention. And what's going to bring students back, right? Yes, big, new, beautiful building, lots of facilities. There's lots of reasons to come back. But again, once you've moved away, it might be harder for you to come back. So I talked about those, athletics and dance. Academics, if folks were still on site, you would be impacted by the disruption of construction, right? There would be noise. We would change the paths around the building in order to protect you from the area that's being worked on. And so, every week you might come and have to come into the building a different way. We don't really know, right? So that's a disruption that could happen. Any community and outside programs just wouldn't be able to meet here. They would have to go somewhere else. And then looking back at culture and heritage, and I didn't mean to put that one last, I just jumped to disruptions. There's a lot here to think about that this really is what I'm so excited to hear from you about. Like, these are things we want to prioritize, right? 1 through 4. So thinking about culture and heritage, there are traditions and there are history here. So if you think about if we're taking down all the buildings, if we're taking down all but one building, it's like, what is it that the community wants to preserve about those buildings? If we think about how important this school is to the community, and if we're taking away parts of it, how are we supporting the community? How are we allowing it to still be strong if we're taking away something that's so integral? We really want to think about how the physical spaces can contribute to a feeling of welcome and culture and heritage. You come in the space, you're like, yes, this is a new building, but it still has the qualities of the building that we like. It still feels like Jeff's community is in there. And so there's another element here that we haven't really talked about, which is these are really big decisions. What is going to be saved versus what is new? And there is a whole commission in Portland that's called the Historic Landmarks Commission. It's Historic Resource Review. This is a historic building. We had some diagrams back there, right, talking about what year each of those were built. And for the Landmarks Commission, it's these 2 buildings. One we're in now plus the gym. Those are the ones that are most important to them, right? The gym retains more of its sort of detail that it had originally. And this big building has been modified a lot, right? So a lot of what was here has been changed over time. So I think the gym will hire, thinking about those 2 buildings. What they're going to do is whatever we decide, whatever this group decides and the community decides about new versus old buildings, they're going to want us to come in front of them and explain what it is that we're doing, right? So even though this is a community discussion and a community process, there's still folks outside of this that we'll have to work with to make whatever decision is made happen, right? It doesn't mean they're not going to say yes to it. It just means that as the design team, all of the architects will work really hard to frame what we've done and provide a narrative that supports what it is in the community. So that's work we have to do, but it's just to let you know that's another element that we will be bringing into this. Yes.
Did you say historic resources?
Yeah.
And who's the government?
So it's City of Portland. So all of those folks in that commission are appointed by the mayor and the city council.
Oh, the planning and sustainability.
It's BDS. It's part of your, so this will have to go through a type 3 land use review, right? So we'll sit in front of historic commission. There will be a design advice request where we say, hey, here's some things that we're thinking about doing. How does that sit with you? And we'll go through a formal process where the public actually is able to come and provide comment on what they think we're doing, if they like it or don't like it, right? It's part of a process that involves everyone. And it's a great process. I'm part of the design commission, so I don't do the historic stuff. I do everything else, but I'm always really thrilled when members of the public come to say whatever it is they want to say about the buildings, good or bad. I like people to be involved and know what's happening in their neighborhoods, right? So we would be going through that kind of process as well. And thinking about disruption.
Excuse me.
Oh, yeah.
Does it have historic designation on those 2 sites?
Yeah, what do you remember what it is, Becca?
Contributing, there was different classifications for buildings. Like some buildings are
they're
contributing
resource.
significant resource that means something else. Contributing means something else. So
Or a landmark, which is what Denison High School is.
Yeah.
This is not one of those.
framework is like, you should not touch it, we need to restore it. Cool.
Yeah, right.
This is not one of them, but this is a contributing.
So that means it still can get restored dollars though, right? It can't because it's not a landmark.
It's not a state landmark. It's a
Exactly.
city, it's a city designated resource. It's actually, it's in a conservation district that was established in, I think, 1993. Piedmont Conservation District, and it's identified that really follows Killingsworth and north of Killingsworth and up to Peninsula Park.
Okay.
It's really it's an interesting and it's an interestingly written document. I'm not quite sure why the school is part of it, but we'll figure it out with the commission.
What's there? Back to this. So thinking about all of these things, I would love for everyone to get in groups of about 3, because having only 3 people might make decision-making a little bit easier, but just come to a consensus on how you want to rank these. What's most important? Culture and heritage, number 1, disruptions, number 2. It's up to you. But just think about it together, get in groups of 3, and then once we'll give you 15, 20 minutes to talk, and then we'll have everyone come back and share what it is that you prioritize at your table.
I'm going to put a 15-minute timer.
Thank you.
Yeah, you guys can get in groups of 3.
You did great.
I was thinking like so much.
I know.
You know, so.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
She chugs a bottle when I got here. Oh, yeah, you have to go. Yeah.
And you're gonna fly. The chief sustainability officer. Did you?
I have mine.
The ranking is so clear. That's why we have to.
For not size.
That's incredible. I like
It's like a phenomenal way of you want to hide right up? I did that today. From downtown.
I think that's so. Yes.
Right. And around them are happier. $4,000. So something.
Still go to yeah.
That's easy.
So that's.
Joys, everyone's safer.
Depression goes down. So that's one.
We have to go to that stop.
Oh, great.
Yeah. What's the moment? Well, I'm thinking
So I. And then.
That's a lot of value.
Right.
But we modernize.
I didn't know
That goes all the way up.
But
I'm saying for much.
Growing valley shift to a different place, right? Yeah, like, oh, I see some vineyard. I'm really excited by it. It's just basically a way bag of tomatoes, right?
I've read different ways.
Well, no,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, they have. Yeah.
Look, I don't know what the fish is. Yeah.
I have no idea.
historically.
Oh, I thought it was just
That's how everything works. Yeah.
well, yeah.
It's just very, very exciting. I mean, you're gonna have to just. Yeah. I know, right? Yeah. I just. I think. I have it set up.
Someone else could.
Well, you know.
Does it have a layout? There's
Yeah, no, it's mind everything. You're in France, what do you think? Yeah.
You know, it wasn't there. Yeah. Okay. They don't know. No matter what else there's. Yeah. That's what I want to say. Yeah. It's just like security place. I mean, that's right. Or yeah. Oh. That's I also like to do I guess it's just like I want to like you put paper towels. I painted it hard and I just painted them. Yeah, I clarified that I.
Oh, really? And here's the minute your application.
Yeah. Yeah, they're like, oh, like you have to exactly like Chandra. Thomas and Pamela are there.
We've got a lot of. Yeah.
Yeah.
My experience is that.
In 1 minute, everybody, one last minute.
That was great. That was 20 feet, and now we have to move all together.
That's what. Okay, everybody. If you can hear them out twice, clap once. Thank you. All right. All right, so let's, this is our report back time so that you can share with the group what your smaller group decided are priorities, and I'm gonna write these down. So what about this group, this table?
We had disruption, culture and heritage, cost and timeline, but we felt like disruption, culture and heritage, like those two kind of could be swapped for us, and cost and timeline were.
Okay, so number 1, disruption, number 2, culture and heritage,
Yeah.
number 3, cost, number 4.
Yeah.
Great. Were there any sort of disagreements or anything you had to kind of negotiate to decide on a number on the ranking? Is there anything anyone was like fighting for?
We're all pretty close. Okay.
That's great. Let's see. Oh, and she didn't do it either. You didn't do it. Okay. Let's start with the table at the back.
The other one was, culture and heritage.
Okay.
Which was disruption. And then we kind of, one of the same page with cost.
Okay.
So I was like, our number 3.
I'll give you a 3/4 for you. Okay. Anything in there that you had to sort of negotiate to come to a consensus on number 1, number 2? A little bit?
I said, we sit on different sides and have different experiences, but you know, Amy, she gave some good points.
Yeah.
You know, why cost was kind of high up.
Right.
But it was good, and she made a good point as to why.
Right.
So I felt that.
Okay.
I just put that out there, because that was, we had to.
Right.
So
Right.
we got that from.
I love it. That's okay. That's that really was what's important. It's like, yeah, got it. All right. What about this table right here?
He said culture and heritage, disruption is number 2, cost is number 3, timeline is number 4.
Right.
Um, and I guess I was really the only one that was kind of bringing up a point between the last set of meetings that we had that kind of explained how the structure will be brought and not in thinking of a whole new structure.
Okay.
So that's where disruption
Yeah.
is exceedingly important.
Yes.
But if you don't take heritage first,
Right,
then it is a disruption.
right.
So they're kind of
So that's
connected.
community, yeah, it's like community disruptions, but also internal disruption to the students and the fields. Well, thought out where they're gonna go, where they're gonna be, they're gonna stay on campus, really partner with PCC, what does that all look?
All right, Mr.
We had, representatives first.
Okay.
We actually have cost second.
Okay.
We had disruption, third B, and then time last.
Okay.
With the disruption piece, we talked about all the disruption and just kind of either side, there's gonna, we just thought they were kind of even, so that's why we had it. That either way you look at it versus, there's,
There'll be disruptions.
yeah. And they were kind of all over.
Yes.
In time, we just thought time would be last. We know it sounds like 10 years, or probably even 5, 2 or 3.
Time's important in thinking about when students are coming back.
Yeah.
Sort of how long the community has to live with the construction and the anticipation of the building being done. Do you have any other groups in the back? Oh, yes.
We had cost and
Yeah.
close second was culture and heritage, and I think one of the points that we brought up in our from that plan for kids is piece of the culture and heritage and where how that resonates with that. And especially when there's someone like I'm going here.
Yeah.
And then we had time and disruptions time. Because we really thought those were really linked together. The disruptions.
And any negotiation that had to happen to get to that list?
Yeah, it's really helpful. We were going to the website on the data.
Oh, great. That makes
For heritage, is it just the adults that care about the different heritage, or are students speaking from? What's the interaction with the students? I also agree that my children would say, I just want technology. Or I want access to sports, or I want, they want opportunity, and so maybe there might be a very heritage piece for the history. Maybe that's more of a, thinking about how to bring that, but bringing the opportunity to students, that's something they actually want.
I think it goes back to what we talked about. And here with the they be focused. They're the ones who have they really want to go here, they want to have to travel here. They don't know who got there, they don't want to go be cheering for the school. I think really happened there.
And I would just say, just as a former teacher in this district, you hear both things. Yes, they like shiny and new, and when they got problems, there was problems with it. You know what I'm saying? So when they got shiny and new, it wasn't quite what they expected. And some things were lost that they had not considered. So I just think I'm with Gary, it definitely, they need to be the voice in here. But I also need for adults, particularly modern and contemporary adults, to not assume that their history is known. And in particular, the Black.
And when I say that's one thing we thought about is when we look at that talk. How do we incorporate, definitely a new deal, how do we incorporate the heritage pieces into it? You understand what we talk about? Well, if we use an old very important How do they incorporate that?
Yeah.
That's just 18% is good enough.
Right, that's right.
30, 35. Yeah. Right?
Yes.
Yes, some big piece of it, and PBS has to come out leading. So we're going to do a good bit that way. We got a problem.
Yes, yes, yes.
Chandra, I
Yeah.
love your question about negotiations.
Yeah.
That's such a brilliant question. And you all did an amazing job. I just want to, sorry, group over there.
All right.
We take some cultural heritage first. But when it's solid, that's like. And then fostering time at the scene. Already predicted and scheduled out to a certain extent and less.
So you put time third and cost last. Oh, you ruined what I was just gonna say. But I'm still gonna say it, since you said they were pretty much tied.
Wait, let's hear if you had any negotiation that had to happen to get to agree.
We did try to look through the lens of the cost, see if it could, but we assumed that the cost was not very flexible. Make the rest better.
Like you just went with logic and you.
So these are the scores, so this
Yes.
line with your scores. What I saw was, except for the very last one, so we had 6 teams reporting. 5 of the 6 teams, number 4, lowest priority was time. And the 6th team put time third out. To me, that's actually kind of a revelation, because there has been a sense of urgency, I think, about doing this work. And I think that's a message that we hear from you. There might be other voices that weigh in on that. And culture and heritage scored first for 4 of the 6 and second for the other 2. And so it sort of pushes right up to the top. It's really, really has those 2 extremes. Yeah.
I think when we talk about the time, we'll get it from the
Yeah. Take the time to do it right.
Right. And we're ready. It's the piece. I think that's. Historically, it hasn't been done. I think that's a really important factor.
Yeah, and we've already waited all this time, right? Yeah. The building's already in disrepair.
Right. Why rush?
Yeah. Come on over here.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm appreciating hearing like the score report back and like the reflection on that, because I feel, and I'm coming in later, it's just all this process starting happening. But in that, I felt like the timeline is like very disconcerting and actually like really supporting the cultural piece, which felt obvious to me before I got involved in this project. And so it's just really great to hear that acknowledged in this process, because I haven't heard anyone say that it needs to happen quickly except and that feels like the conversation we were having, like, we got 1 minute. I was like, well, let me say this thing. And there wasn't actually space for it. And so I feel like even the meeting itself may have too many objectives to effectively do everything we're talking about making happen. So maybe it's possible to, even kind of shift in service of that.
I love that comment. I want to, if I could, pivot back to this group. Would you be willing to consistently have this as a longer meeting so that we can have more meeting conversations?
I'm gonna work with the 7.
Oh, yeah. Great comment at the front. I would come more often, but I wouldn't stay longer.
Yeah, I could do that.
Okay. Yeah?
Yes. Start earlier was not so. That's important.
You start, yeah. So more meetings, more frequency,
And,
same duration.
and maybe also that the arc of this goes longer. Like it was interesting looking at the timeline that was the beginning of this portion, the earlier portion, we're like halfway through. And like a lot of the pieces are like showing up today. And even folks who have been around are like, oh, I'm starting to get what's going on. So to be halfway through and need to be making these decisions quickly is not okay. Like I haven't even talked with, my position, and so talk to people who are not in this room, and I haven't even started. I'm like just getting to figure out what's going on. And I'll kind of be able to show up to those meetings and be like, hurry up, which is not what it's. They want to hear that we're doing this the right way, that the cultural component is the most important part. And I'm hearing that in the land acknowledgements, and the language, and the vision, and the mission. And those are cool words, but those like feel good. And I'm busy. And so I just want to put that out there. If time can be extended, it should be.
I think we're going in the right direction.
That's not for me to answer. Like, fingers crossed.
If you're taking it, for me, if you're taking it, because I deal with DEI stuff all the time. If you're really attempting to take it from being performative, away from being performative into an actual project that's going to affect change, then time is your friend. So I'm just gonna let you know that, particularly when you got to go back out to a community who has been rushed and pushed and driven and displaced and rushed and pushed, and everything is like, so that's my true sense.
Joe's also comment over there
A little bit.
Oh, yeah, I got to some attention.
Yeah.
That's true.
My kids stay with me until 5 and create something just like
Yeah, we're going to try and bring programs into the school as part of the effort, but yeah, there's the whole time thing, right? So I love what I'm hearing.
I just wanted to say, I'm last on my prioritization of things, but I did want to just point out that the schedule that we have been talking about is working backwards from when students would be in, so in any conversation where we're talking about expanding the timeline to engage more voices to get it right, which may very well be the right thing to do. We're also talking about the kids starting in a new building later. So most likely because it's difficult to compress all that stuff that has to come. So
Yeah, so
I'm
that's
just-
kind of the disruption bucket,
Yeah.
right? In a way, although a little different. But
Well,
yeah,
these two are tied together. The longer it takes, potentially could be more or less
Yeah.
disruption. So it just depends. They're linked.
I think
I would also say a lot of the other bureaus and and so, just like all the consultants are paid by the average, I think it's important for folks that are showing.
we're going to put that on the record, and we thank you for saying. Yeah. Yes. So we are going to take a break. We're going to take a 5-minute break. There's food, there's cookies, there's water, and then we're going to come back and we're going to do the most exciting, most interesting piece of this meeting. And please don't leave.
All the things you talked about get applied in the next part.
Here, y'all.
All
Please.
the things that we just talked about get applied in the next interactive exercise
Today.
Today, so.
Scenarios today.
In
So
5 minutes.
don't leave after the break or during the break.
Thank you.
Get the. Amazing.
Yeah, well, they're in the break. He's trying to pretend. You guys are trying to
You're not getting. I know. You're gonna get the whip. The tacos.
Yeah.
One day. One day you'll get like. Be like, what's up? You want to hear that? I'm like, I got
A quick question on, there's sorry, no, PBs, yeah.
Was this doing such Rob?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. So if you wanted to think about like what's the key? Right, there's no chemicals, no modifications. And then leads so it are but if you
My top door, my. Now.
About 20-25 years. But those 20-25 years. So similar to what we talked about body carbons operating. But most like other things like concrete structure don't have a do that mass one time.
What are the
Yeah, I see it's not a restriction. Yeah, it's not that restricted. Like West
You guys are feeling pressure? Is that what you're saying? What are the questions? I would love to help. Where is,
My building's oriented.
Like we need. Sure. We have to offset all of that.
For years. You might use their class. That's it. Wrong about that.
I go, problematic structures, but the purpose of marketing that all you put on the
You can't hear my voice.
I've never been.
If you can hear my voice. So we're gonna be for TV.
Okay, so Sandra did a lot of the things that she went through, sort of the considerations, the 4 buckets that we talked about. Basically, in this next exercise, we're going back to touching on what Corey talked about, right? Okay. If you guys want to come over, I will talk louder too, but want to make sure that we apply some of the things that we've heard through Sandra, through Corey, through Kareem, what they've shared. How do we think about the site now and how do we use what we learned to apply to looking at some scenarios? Because ultimately, we need to figure out if we are where we're building, what part of the building we're saving, is it all new? Is it renovation of parts, right? So all of those things, I think, in an architectural traditional practice would be just where does this building go? And we would show you like a model and be like, do you like this one? Do you like this one? Which one do you like, right? But we're not doing that because we're taking a broader stance on how we look at this big picture. So we're thinking about disruption and cultural sort of significance to this project as a whole, and we want you guys to rate those with us. So we're really sharing all the things that we're thinking about. We're researching, we're looking at the building, we're talking to people, and we're taking all of those things and we're just sharing it with you so that you can think about them the same way we're, right? Ultimately, you guys have to decide what's the right thing, and we're here to help you. So questions as we talk through this are welcome. I want to just mention that Corey touched on this a lot, but saving these two buildings does mean major work to these buildings. So if you've been to Benson lately, you can see that, it's basically an entire gutting of the building in order to seismically upgrade it to code, as Sandra mentioned. So that is time, that is cost, okay? But we have 3 scenarios that they're showcased in the boards there, and we have boards to pass out to each group. But I'm just going to go over them really quickly. I already talked about this. We are asking you all to rate each of the schemes, mostly in these categories, because we have some things to share in a general sense about them in cost and time. So 3 ideas here that we're showcasing. First one is a full replacement high school on the north side of the site. So Killingsworth is here. Alberta is down here. This is, for many of you, and it's been brought up a lot today, that it's the Lincoln model, right? The kids will stay on site in the existing buildings. Construction will happen on the north, on the field. This means there will be no field for people to use, right? Track and field will have to go off-site during the construction period.
The Lincoln scenario.
It's a Lincoln scenario, but once the building is built, people move from the old into the new, and then this will be replaced with a new field. So if you know the Lincoln, this is exactly the scenario that was done there. That's an option. The second option is also a full new building, but on the south side of the site. So you're going to say, well, what happened to those buildings? Well, those buildings will be demolished. It might be phased, where students can stay in it for a while, and we build on the south side of the site. And then, move people over, and then, there's a whole scenarios of that. But what this scheme does that's different from the other one is that the track and field stays in place, right? Because the community invested in that also. So we want to understand that aspect from all of you and think through that. And that's why, all new construction on the south side, there's a possibility to reuse theater, maybe phased out the 1909 building in different construction phases. Very detailed. Maybe we don't need to think about that too much today because I'll be here all night.
But it does maybe involve building a temporary, like a lot of portables, maybe on the south.
But there'll be some moving, some disruption aspects to this, right? Because we will probably need to temporarily move some students and classes and things into the south lot on the other side of Alberta. So this is, you'll get a board that has the same information in there, but this kind of shows you the steps that we, at least at a high level, are thinking about. There's more steps in this scheme than this one, right? This scenario, you can just clearly see there's less steps. So you can read through this more, you're going to have to demolish the building, build new, move, and then the site can be done. Okay, the third scenario is keeping parts of the existing building. So as Sandra said, 1909 1928 are the key parts of the building that has historic significance in an architectural sense? Does it have cultural significance to all of you and the community is a question. Is one different than the other? We would love to hear what your guys' thoughts are on that. But let's, for the sake of this, some part of this will be kept, and we would build a new addition to the south. So this one is, will mean renovation. That does mean like where the kids, right, during that part, again, temporary portable classrooms over here on the south side. The track and field stays in place. You can use it. Well, construction will be contained. Phasing might occur as well. Theater maybe stays longer and, kids move around. So again, potentially more steps. And this is kind of a way to kind of share that quickly. But as you see on the bottom and on the boards that we share with you, all of this has a dollar sign and a clock associated with it because the more steps, typically more time, right? The cost also, a renovation, as Sandra said earlier, is going to cost a significant, amount of the budget. It's going to be spent on the renovation. And I think it goes to some of the discussion earlier, we have to evaluate, what we can work with in the building. There's a structure, there's a size to this building. So classroom sizes might not be as ideal or as the way that we would design it if it was a new building, right? There's some different things happening when you're renovating an existing building because there's things here that we would keep. But in terms of just to make sure you guys understand, the full renovation of this building or the 1928 gym is significant, and just consider it almost rebuilt, in a sense when you think about it. Those are the three scenarios. I'm going to pass out boards. All three of them are on the same board, so you can look at them. Yes.
Can you just speak to just briefly, because it's part of the culture and heritage part and some of the stuff when I'm just going through some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
What can be, so even just some of the code stuff, so like can a new building be 4 stories high? Probably not.
The maximum
So that's what I'm
height.
saying. So yeah, could you just clarify some of the things of a rebuild, just that we could keep that would be grandfathered in versus what couldn't be done in a renovation?
Yeah. So the maximum building height overall for the project, and there's a complicated answer to that, is 75 feet. So that's typically 4-story building. There's nuances to that in that there are different types of setbacks around the site, around the perimeter. There's different setbacks. The first line that we get to is, I think it's 45. We can build to 45, and then another 10 feet, we can go up to 75. So there is a nuance to that. And the track and field is not within the site boundaries right now. It got a variance for whatever reason, right? So when we build a new field in scheme, it's option idea 1 here, that field is going to that field is going to have to set back because there's also site setbacks that we need to pay attention to when we build new. So this field is not going to be as close to the street or any of the sides as this. But
So 4 stories with moderate setbacks is perfectly possible.
It's perfectly possible.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. What are the other questions?
Two scenarios where the track doesn't change location, did not get any lucky. It's still getting fully redone again, or is that in budget available?
So right now we are getting an assessment. Somebody's going to dig it into the field and understand, is it in good shape? Does it need repair? I mean, honestly, it's going to need some kind of repair, but it would cost less than building a new field potentially, right?
Yeah.
The athletic specifications are in the specs. So it's part of the.
Yeah.
So we don't like that. There's always design.
So let me ask that same question a different kind of way though. So if you're moving the track, whether it needs work done on it or not, to a different space in the land overall, isn't that gonna be fairly expensive?
Yeah, but you know, the thing, I mean, in relative terms, I would say, yes, that is gonna cost money, right? But also renovating the building is gonna cost more than a new building. So right now, it's hard to tell exactly where those things are, but in relative terms, the amount of work that needs to be done to the renovation of this building is probably cost more than this.
Exactly.
The site work.
I'm just trying to get on.
Oh, quick question. And can we give us what that cost difference would be? We talking about $10 million savings, we go versus the model, we talking about 40 million.
Tens of millions, and we don't really know yet. We need to, we're gonna be doing, we don't have to pick a scheme now based on a number of circles. We'll be developing multiple schemes and doing cost models for them, but we don't have any cost models yet. We, from a couple of years ago, yes, we do. So it compared, I think it did a new construction versus a phased renovation, and I don't have those numbers on my tongue right now.
They're in the.
You have them find them, there you go. Okay,
They're
thank
in
you,
the
Amy.
binders. But I think.
Okay, we do have the cost from when it was done in whatever, 2019.
Those were very rough.
Super rough.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I get that. I'm just saying we do have an idea.
Yeah, we can pull that out. We can look through that and talk about it as you guys are doing the exercises, but I think, I don't know who said it, but we're not gonna decide anything. We just want you guys to think through these and tell us like, what's the most important thing? You know, and, you know, it could be a series of things. It could be a tie, you know, on different things, but what we want to do is just start these conversations, and the next time we're gonna be sharing actual sort of like more building comprehensively, like what goes where kind of things, back to you guys, but, you know, under these scenarios, yes.
Is there any scenarios? I think where is it? All three of these, most likely kids that don't like these and enjoying this. Give them. So is there anything that can be done that's like, hey, we've got some great real estate, a high transit corridor, we can get some housing. So that we can at least go and make sure that daycare or something, we can go and have some sort of assurance that, you know, folks that want to be there versus.
I think some of that is in the program as well, right? The middle college, the teen parent center, those are things that was part of it.
If you
Yeah.
put housing on.
If you give up some of your property, and
Yeah.
currently there isn't enough room to put everything in the ed spec on this property. So that would have to be a trade-off that you make.
Housing being done around the area.
Should you go to kids?
So I have a question. So, like in 2018, 2019, I thought that the scenario had already been reached. Third scene, I think that's for the community.
That was pre-bond. So that was just an idea so that we can understand potential costs, so that the bonds work. So now that the bond work is done, we're opening it back up. We want you guys to think through all the scenarios with us and decide, because at the end of that, there were people who said, what about an all new building? Why aren't we thinking about that, right? So we feel like it was done quickly. It was, you know, again, time. Like
It wasn't intended to be a solution. It was just intended to be a fairly conservative scenario to develop a budget so that PPS could go out for the bond, and it wasn't ever intended to be, this is the solution.
Yeah.
This group is now helping us figure out the solution.
I think it was explained last time, and maybe that's helpful or not, or the first time when we were having that discussion about what went into that, like the positive element of that was the highest dollar amount
Yes.
came out of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we'll put that into the bond. So, you know, sets us up for this conversation to happen.
Yeah, that project proposed a building that built an entire temporary school, and then did the work on site in phases, keeping the theatre open on site to maximize sort of facilities. But it was the most extended schedule and the most complicated with a temporary school. And so that was back in 3 years ago. A lot has happened in 3 years.
Yeah.
With the sort of planning scenario that established the bond ask.
So we do have 5 boards. I was hoping you guys, I know there were 6 groups before, but I would love to condense us to 5 groups. There's a board that I can pass out to each of you to look at these. And then at the end of, what do we say, 20 minutes?
This says 20 minutes here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think we're going to go to around 9:15, 9:25. We're just going to do a 5-minute sort of other business at the end of all of this. So
at the end, I'm giving you your table dots, and you're going to come up and put your group's consensus, and put the dots on the cultural rating. So group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
So we have 5 tables, 5 boards.
tables.
I'm afraid those of you who are at the back of the room, we'd ask you to come and join a table.
We would love that.
The dot system.
Oh, sorry, I pre-streamed it. So the dot rating is up here. So 1 dot is the least disruptive. 5 dot is the most. Okay, that makes sense.
These dots don't really hit those dots.
They do.
They will go up.
They will go up. They will go.
Just, oh.
So these talks going to get put on that.
Yeah.
I don't think.
I guess we should label.
So, maybe, I mean, part of the buildings are. No, but I mean. It will. Definitely.
How about here? Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
We will put.
But you can, yeah, it looks like maybe there aren't 5.
They're all joining together.
Yeah, it looks like we might be more like 3.
Maybe all 3, maybe everyone's
We'll do
doing.
3. All right.
Live fermentation.
Well, you need.
We're gonna do that with all scenarios. But in this characters.
Yeah.
Top. The old.
Last time we got
A long timeline.
The other piece of data are, when you do these others, it's not so deep. I'm just saying what you listen.
Either way, is goes with some part of the recreation space on either end.
The old time. You need to create.
But like.
So. Oh my God. I would say that. Actually, I'm not saying, that's what I'm saying. You know, like, this is 2 days. The biggest.
I think there's only 3 tables. They all sell out.
Yeah, now they added, no, but they added right after. It's like, you No, it's where our wire. What I don't.
I want to say those. Yeah, she just centers down and then.
And no one, yeah, no one thinks like that.
Yeah, they are. But it's not gonna be.
We will have it.
Well, what the group means is actually accessible outside. I do think some amounts of that, but it does sound.
Say for example.
We'll give.
Not rush out. Like they don't have that. Well, it's like, okay. Well, that's my teeter. Yeah. Like their comments. No, but I'm saying, but there's like. No, I'm just saying, like, for example, their comments, they have, like, you know what I mean? Like some of those. Like,
Working on libraries, and everyone is like, I would really, issue, right? You can only have a couple of librarians at a time and everything, right? And so those, like, even as much hard to do, like, there's some nooks and crannies, I mean, the view of that, yeah, maybe you can get both. I don't know that it's one or the other, but I definitely think that all this stuff.
Yeah. They're in giant shape. So like. All of those options. All of them could have a courtyard. It's not just the one, the bottom. Everybody got it. Any of them. That's not goes to.
Excuse me.
There
There was.
No, it was done, and there was why.
That one is.
I gotta go down.
That's different than
No, that was not great. No, with the meeting, it's probably like that's. It was open house or a town hall meeting.
So how does that the town like? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of times we pull those meetings. And that's not, well, no, I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
Because we are. Again, we are a different tool. However,
I know the joke.
it's not just one.
This is the lower, this is the lower, and all the freshmen.
don't know. Literally, an empty school, you're like, oh, we're not that. And so, you know, there's an opportunity. So what I'm saying is, there exists outside of the scope, what is it, closed book, but there's not. That the good component is program match, right? And so the elements, yes, of right now, also so when you're in a position, having a conversation, and it has to be out there. That can become component everlasting into and that is completely with what is being heard about the order of intelligence. But I also think that
Consider after like the remodeling grant.
Okay, so can you go put that on? You guys talking about disruption, heritage with that on that.
well,
Should we just do it in?
Okay, everybody, it's time to report out.
What happened to the key? Where's the presentation?
I didn't. So if you put a bunch of the orange dots, what does that mean?
So, no. So we're trying to bring that back up. Hold on a second. She's moving back to that. So one red dot means least disruption. You think it's the least disruption. Can we all go and put that? Five dots means most disruption for this game.
This down here.
Yeah, just. Okay, thank you. Where's the phone here?
So let's all do red dots. They're doing it on their boards.
So if I. Well, it's Can I convene there for a second? So I'm understanding our interpretation is that both of these options are extremely disruptive to the community and therefore also not in any way. And that just is the least disruptive and most. I would vote.
So two means
As far as like the construction of this.
I see.
Yeah.
The fewer dots.
We are two. We are two.
Oh, I see, relative.
How we perceive it.
So then.
Oh, I thought they did a.
It goes
That this option would get.
We put our numbers now.
Yeah.
Then we want red, these would get five. Now, because they're-
So where,
We got group three. So the, we put five on it. I can transfer. You know what it is? They are. Should we all go over to the board? Well, I think that's part of the problem of this exercise, is that what they're doing is distilling down our conversation into dots. It's sort of how we I'm willing to bet.
You guys hear that? Another way to deal with this whole thing. So is to not. I don't
know y'all wanna like play games. So, and it's also part of it is if everyone starts putting.
all right, now I gotta.
So someone has made the option that this is preferred the most. They put no postal dots. So.
No, that is not true. That is not true. That is not true. They are saying that is the most disruptive.
That's what I said.
Yeah, they haven't done the report yet.
That's what I said.
So you
Sure, I'm just saying it's not there yet. And similarly, if we put no information there, we'll also not be there. Therefore, unclear.
But if we're putting the dots on the thing that is the closest.
only dealing with red dots right now.
Just red dots.
Red dot. Red dot.
Just red dots right now. Don't work on it.
Honestly, going to school and working. But never got that.
But it sounds like you're saying that this is not.
Oh, gosh.
So we can.
Means portable.
Yeah.
Unless you're talking correct.
And so board, no.
Culturally, the consumer votes for that.
Well, we don't do that.
Culturally,
What I'm trying to say, you can use the dot system. And you can consider it and make the choices about how you feel. Logistics are in. So we said 0 on the first one, the second one is in the middle, third one is the most.
I guess I know good. Sorry, I said it was.
Everybody.
One day. Yeah. With y'all, the box would be on I. Yeah, that's because we all did that. No, we all. That one.
I want to let everybody go home because I'm getting late. I want to wrap it up for a brief second. Thank you very much for doing your group work. I heard a lot of different opinions between the groups. So, can we have everybody's attention, please?
Wrap it up.
Thank you.
Please.
Brian.
Okay.
Thank you for staying with us so late. Jeannie would like to do a few comments about the exercise we've just done, and then I'll just do a little bit about homework, and then we'll let you go.
We appreciate all, and we heard so much great discussion in each group. And I think it was chaotic because there's so much good things to talk about. But I would just want to say that thank you for people who did do the dots, this group over here on 3. Special kudos to that team. We got really great feedback. We understood that team's position on which scheme and how they rated things. And we would love to get that from you as well. And we're going to just digest it because as I walked around, I heard a lot of different things. There was not like everybody thought the same thing within the groups. I want people to understand that is part of the process. We have to hear everybody. And next time, let's switch up the group so we're not always in the same discussion points, right? Hearing the same perspective. So thank you so much. We have a quick homework.
Well, I think maybe a question and then a homework thing.
Okay.
So I didn't hear what conversation was happening. I didn't hear those really important points. How do we hear them?
I think the best thing can we go around each group and just say one quick 1 minute? Or do we not have time?
Yeah, maybe what we could do is another Google Doc. So I would suggest that we add it to the homework request. So we already have a request that you read the guiding principles. And I think we need to ask you individually to share with us your thoughts based on this exercise.
Yeah.
So with your permission, we'll send out a reach out and maybe, what were your sort of 3 key points or something like that. We'll do it quickly so that it's fresh.
With space to write.
With space to write. Is it not
We're
space?
doing this, it's on a computer, but you know.
Yeah. Okay. Very.
I'll make a request for the 2.0 version of this meeting, that we flip the agenda as much as possible so that we cannot leave this exercise to the very last when people are tired and there's not enough time and we feel a little crazed and rushed.
Yeah.
Can we flip it? I know there's sort of some preamble stuff that needs to happen, but this is the most important conversations we could be having at this point.
Yeah.
And we left it to the last of the
When people are
agenda.
tired and frazzled and have to go.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely.
We could just consider that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's really good input.
Okay.
So we've also heard that more shorter meetings would be better. I think stay tuned for maybe a slight restructuring for the time that we have left. I would like to point out this is meeting 3 of what were planned to be 7. So even though the time might be halfway through, we're not halfway through the planned meetings. So I want to make that very clear. And there's another 3. Yeah. So in a couple of weeks, we'll be at the end of 3 of what is currently 7, and we might add 8 to 9. So stay tuned.
Can I ask a question about that? So the meeting on the 7th is going to be this very same meeting?
Maybe restructured per Mary's suggestions. It's an idea. It's
The same content, the
it's-
same,
It's the same content. You are not being asked to come back.
Right.
You may, if you love it so much you want to. We would love to have you here. But it's going to be a duplication of this, perhaps restructured, like reformatted.
flipping.
Yeah.
Just another consideration, because there's some of us that don't work full time, but we consult. So you're there's a timeline, you're messing with my calendar. I'm just letting you know that. So even when you get to those 2 meetings,
Yes.
it kind of needs to be like really, really clear and as far in advance as you can do it so that I don't have to miss an opportunity.
Yeah. We hear you.
Paying opportunity.
Oh.
It's not a big
Okay, so my last shot is, so this actually is the real homework. So CPC 4, which is the 21st of September so far, 1 meeting. I think we will hold that date. So our 4th meeting of this group is in all fresh material. All of you, please come. Is to start looking at the program. So the things that are in the building, the things that are in the rooms, we're in a library, AKA a media center. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about gyms. We're going to talk about special spaces that support what makes Jefferson special. We're going to talk about dance studios. And we need you to help us prioritize perhaps some of these things or tell us what is missing in our list. So we're going to send you some reading material around the PPS education specification. It's a very interesting document, a little bit of a preamble about what it is, and a list of the spaces that we had previously, a couple of years ago, talked about putting in the building. It's just a starting point that we're going to build on with you in CPC 4. But the more you read ahead of time, the more effective we're going to be in this meeting. Ayana.
So small compared to the amount of work that you guys have done and everything else that you all are saying. If I come back to Leonard so that we don't forget them at the next meeting, that would be great. And if there was a misspelling, please let me know. Yep.
Thank you all so
Thank you
much.
so Thank you.